Hello and good morning, and welcome to this edition of the Sunday Lunch Show with me, Brent, and
Me, Adam.
today we're going to be cancelling ourselves, so it seems. So we're apologising right now if this is going to be our last show, should we offend anybody, because we are going to be discussing cancel culture in the classroom. So apologies up front if we offend anybody, but this is today's Sunday Lunch Show.
Okay, well, good. I'll correct Brent. It's good afternoon. I think it's because we've been on half term. It feels like morning maybe.
Yeah.
But Brent is slapping away on some chewing gum. So
Try to get rid of that.
yeah, it's a classic kind of. Are you chewing?
No, sir, I'm not chewing.
Oh man, he's just looking under the table as well. Old school kind of Grange Hill activity going on. But so you're giving up some stuff for Brent? For Lent, Brent.
I've given up some Brent for Lent.
Yeah.
I've definitely given up some Brent for Lent. So yes, I've done the usual Lent trick of crisps, chocolate, sweets, and anything that's pretty much naughty. So that's my Lent. So that was my this week as well. Had my ashes in a car park. Quite surreal. Drive by Catholic ashes in a car park outside my school, which is interesting. So it's one of the days in the year when I obviously revealed myself to be a practicing Catholic, and boom, I come. My two girls and I were walking around most of Derbyshire with dirty foreheads.
Yeah.
For Wednesday, of course, we had the pancakes on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Fully recommend pancakes homemade with some lemon,
Yeah.
and we're lucky we got lemon because apparently lemon seems to be running out.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
I don't know if pancakes go with turnip.
Or grated turnips on top. We went for the American style actually. I quite prefer them with a bit of baking powder and puff them up a little bit so you have the little the short ones.
Oh.
And what word do we use to do that? Are they enormous? Are they wide? Are they large? We've got to find the words.
Did you have some rather big fat pancakes?
Well, I would have called them fat, but maybe that's not the word. And that's part of the discussion today is about kind of the use of language and how we use it in the classroom, and also how we kind of reinterpret the literature that we have in the classroom as well. Obviously, that's been the debate this week about from Roald Dahl, and we want to kind of get that debated today. That's our big question of today. But interesting, our colleague, or your colleague, sorry, but on our previous show, Nathan, Mr. Metacognition.
Yeah.
I'll say that for you, Brent, so you don't get tongue-tied.
Not metacognition, as I always called it.
Yeah.
No, metacognition.
Yeah. So my Lent story is going to be that he's written a really interesting article in this in today's test online about is it time to ditch exit tickets, and so I'm going to give that a go because he's right in some respects. Why are we leaving these hinge questions or big questions at the end of the lesson? Why aren't we dealing with them inside the lesson rather than waiting till afterwards and finding out that maybe some people didn't.
Do you want to hear the irony in
get
this?
it? Yeah.
The irony is I was going to adopt exit tickets.
Well, I think they have a purpose and they're good for retrieval maybe, and they're good for just a summary. I mean, I use them really as a summary of the lesson. So a couple of key questions.
Yeah.
I wouldn't use them as kind of it's all going to hang on this right at the end. If you got this right, you can go, because what was if you got it wrong? What was if you don't?
Do you want to hear the second irony? The second irony is that both myself and Mr. Metacognition had CPD before we had an inset. And in that inset, we had one of our guest speakers saying about the power of exit tickets.
Oh, he's obviously tied.
But isn't this the beautiful thing about education and pedagogy? Is that you end up sort of what works for one doesn't work for another. But it's goose for the gander, isn't it? And it's that kind of aspect of what you adopt, whatever strategy you adopt, is as long as you're consistent with it, and it works within the and I think subjects work sometimes. But what was interesting about what was said in that CPD was the one exit ticket I took away from the hours spent listening to those individuals was that apparently doing an exit ticket, like writing down a list, it helps the memory even 6 months later. And I thought that idea of it's a very easy, quick way of doing an exit ticket, bang, the students then recall the knowledge because and I would equate it to back when I was teacher training all those years ago. We were incessantly taught to plenarize. Yeah. Remember the three-part lesson? And you had to always do like a 10-minute plenary. And every observation I ever got was always like, the 15-minute starter, the squeezed main, and the afterthought that was the plenary. And I used to have one of my colleagues who was an absolute brilliant teacher, and we used to call him Mr. Plenarise, because basically he became to observe. He was the senior manager. You knew you had to do a 15-minute plenary. He did a plenary on the plenary, which is kind of like ridiculous when you think about it. But we were drummed into it. Remember, we had the 3-part lesson.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, definitely. It was, and there's loads of things that kind of. I've seen some really good stuff this week as well about. The other thing that was rammed into us when we were first training was the learning styles thing. There's been some
visual, auditory, and kinesthetic.
I can't remember who it is on Twitter that keeps posting the stuff, but he's done some really good stuff on. Thank goodness this is all gone now in terms of the style, because
brain gym,
all that stuff. But but we go round, and I'm sure that we'll go round again.
I love my phrase, Socrates. In the end of the day, what he did 2,400 years ago, asking questions. Fundamentally, pedagogy doesn't change that much. The Aboriginals are passing down their knowledge for 40,000 years, from grandparent to grandchild, telling their stories orally. So somewhere along the line, people pick that up. People learn. And I think our brains, the way they are, our human brains, have not evolved in the last 100,000 years or so, which is one of the reasons why we still have lots of human behaviours we can't fully understand, because we're hot-wired to be those individuals that are still running around in caves. But that's not the beautiful thing about we sometimes come up with new strategies, and you realise, actually, that's not a new strategy. We've been doing that all along. Or somebody puts a name to something that you've been doing almost by instinct as common sense, and you're like, oh, deliberate practice. What's deliberate practice? Oh, that's deliberate practice. We've done that all along. Stop making this up.
Yeah. We'll go back to the telling of stories. And I'm a big fan of just actually, most of this holiday I've been reading the 21 questions for the new century, I think it's called, by Harari. I forgot his name. I'll load it up in a minute. But the guy did Sapiens and Homo Deus and the 24 lessons. And he always says about the narrative and the storytelling and how important that is. And I guess that links into some of what we're talking today about. How important the words are within these stories, and how they may get passed down generations, or maybe some generations may think it's okay to say certain words in different contexts. Because we've all got older parents, uncles, aunties that don't necessarily mean any harm by what they're saying. However, they are using words that wouldn't be used.
I often in the classroom will actually turn around and say, have you had this conversation with your grandparents or your parents? And the children sort of wince and say, and I've had children say to me, Mr. Poland, as my grandfather says, no, don't call your grandfather racist. He's from a certain time, and in that time, and even had the conversation with my own parents, there's always that struggle. But then in turn, did my parents have the same conversation with their parents, who had the same conversation with their parents? And you go all the way back. Is this a normal cycle of human evolution that times change, some people change with it, and some people refuse? And as educators, what we are constantly charged with doing is updating ourselves and refreshing ourselves. I think we always have a foot in both camps, don't we? We're trying to be of the generation we are, but at the same time, we're trying to teach a generation that sometimes we struggle to understand. But then that's the crux of being a good educator, is trying to bridge that gap between understanding what's going on in their brains, but then sometimes not compromising and saying, oh, I'm sorry, we're not, that this is not for budging. There has to be some red lines. There has to be some things where you say, I'm more than willing to compromise on some things, but these are things that I won't compromise on because these are eternal. And the relationship between, for instance, the teacher to the pupil, yes, the pupil has to be the pupil and the teacher has to be the teacher. And sometimes I think those lines get blurred when students can get very, I know better than you. And you think, okay, maybe you might have some ideas there. Maybe sometimes they do. But they've got to understand that power dynamic, and they've got to understand the dynamic of what the purpose and function of school is. And these stories this week actually start to show that maybe that's shifting. We as educators are now not as sort of seen as educators any longer. We're being questioned. And I do worry in the future about people educating themselves without that medium of us to try and wade through it. And because part of our job is to sometimes make things relevant, update things.
And pick through things. Because we had many lecturers, didn't we? I remember we had one lecturer that was very pro us being more of the facilitator, rather than the kind of old school dogmatic teacher. That there that the lessons should be more open to interpretation by people, and us as teachers almost like a conductor, almost kind of weaving our way through it and listening to everyone's point of view and processing all that very quickly and interpreting it back to them in a way, using the literature that we know to kind of say, well, actually, that may be true.
It's the stimulants, isn't it? Yeah. It's also having the gatekeeper of that, because that's what our job is to expose the children to that material. Our job is to organise the curriculum. Our job is to choose the material that they want to learn from. So we have to then have a criteria, a rationale, and say, why am I choosing? That comes again to the crux of the matter today of what is behind the teacher's choice to choose a certain literature. As the government sort of said, you must teach these books. And if you must teach these books, then the autonomy of the teacher's not there to say, I know what my students need. And there has been a little bit of that in the last couple of years, where we'll have a look and we'll discuss the English curriculum, have a look at the history curriculum. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go through a couple of the news stories this week. Yeah. And then we'll have
I just want to say one thing. It's part of my half term is we're like 4 or 5 days into a game of Monopoly. And I'm thinking I'm going to be playing Monopoly when I get back to school with the kids, because what the lessons we've learned around kind of social policy, education, economics, business, liberalised thought, liberalised processes, it's just been fantastic. So I'm definitely pro kind of gaming and stuff, or using the old school board games as an access point to lots.
I got myself into trouble this week.
What, at home?
Yeah. I was playing Mario Kart and I kept winning. Yeah. And I refused to allow my 7-year-old to win. I'm not doing it. Yeah. I'm not having my 7-year-old win. She's got to learn that if she wants to beat me, she's going to have to learn to evolve. Same way, she's going to have to use that brain of hers, that fantastic fast learning brain. But she was like, I'm going to give up because Daddy's winning. And I was gloating a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say, were you running around with the shirt over the...
well, you know, she nearly beat me once. She nearly beat me once, and then, you know, I picked her in the last corner, but there was a feeling of when she does win, she actually was like that felt good. Mm. But I was being put under pressure to like, oh, that's not going to encourage her to take part in the game, and I thought, actually, no, she's got to learn how to lose. Yeah. She's got to learn how to overcome the challenge. Got to learn that sometimes it doesn't go your way. Yeah. What are you going to do about that? Yeah. What are you going to do about that? Are you going to give up? Are you going to give in, or am I going to make it easy for you? No, I'm not going to make it easy for you. Your job is to beat. Yeah. Your job is, I challenge you. Your job is to beat me now. Yeah.
And it's very, very kind of the big thing at the minute is about stretch and challenge, isn't it, in schools? And but I guess it's important for the stretch to be achievable at some point. I think
that's your scaffolding and your ZPD.
Otherwise, it never gets.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, can she beat me playing Mario Kart? Of course she can. Yeah. And that's the whole point. And I know what I'm doing with that, but I felt under pressure of like, oh, and I did make a glib comment of like, does everybody win here? Does everybody look at 1 to 15? Does Mario and Bowser, they all come first? No, there's got to be somebody who's winning and somebody who's not winning. Yeah. But the challenge there is that you have to come up with strategies and tactics. And I could see the next day. Here's the irony: the next day she came to me and she says, "Daddy, can we play Mario Kart?" And guess what? Guess what happened? She won.
Good girl.
But you have to. This is our problem now as educators. We're trying to please everybody, and we're trying to make everybody like so. We're almost removing too many barriers. Sometimes we're making things far too easy, I think, and therefore, when it comes to a proper challenge, I don't think there's a resilience or stoicism there. And the same can happen, for instance, when you have the new interpretation of some of these classical books. If you make them more accessible, okay, more people might read them. But then, where's the challenge in that? Where's the enjoyment of working it out? As you say, puzzles, games, and challenges are often brilliant for the mind. I mean, remember those brain trainer things about 10 years ago you used to get? Was it Dr. Such and Such?
It was on the was it Nintendo DS? It came out on the Nintendo DS, didn't it?
There's a lot of learning in gaming, isn't there? There's a lot of learning in overcoming things. So that was my week where I was playing some Mario Kart. You know.
And the other interesting thing I had this week was I took my girls down to London and we sat in the House of Parliament. Wow. And we went to the gallery at the Commons. And there was a really interesting bill actually through a second reading.
Get the cultural capital on you.
Yeah, cultural capital, cashing it in. And they were genuinely interested, actually. I mean, obviously, once they got over the kind of the site, it's the classic thing, isn't it? Oh, this looks smaller than it does on TV. It wasn't the chamber wasn't full at all. largely because I think the bill was largely being rubber stamped. But it's a second bill on employment rights, particularly around flexible learning, flexible employment. And it's interesting, the amendment that's been made to the employment bill is about the right of an employee to request flexible learning. I don't know why I keep doing this. Flexible. I think it's because Wednesday's coming up and we're thinking about kind of setting work. But the flexible working hours. So it'd be interesting to know how that fits with the public sector. Can teachers, for example, request flexible learning, and then the school would have to. I mean, I presume they would say no.
I think, but to solve the recruitment retention crisis,
but they would have to. They would have to listen to that conversation. I think that maybe there might be, over the next couple of years, more and more people. It might be that critical mass thing.
Yeah.
Or if more and more people keep because they're changing the law. If more and more people request flexible learning. Flexible earning, no, flexible working.
Flexible working.
What am I doing?
But then here's the interesting thing, would that be up to individual trusts? Because the thing is now, individual trusts can set their own, their own pay scales.
Yeah. Well, it might be interesting because I know we had this conversation.
Well, could you imagine that recruitment? You saw last week the recruitment thing of like, do you want to come blood, sweat and tears, blood and guts in Sheffield?
Easy.
You know what I mean? Are you willing to sacrifice your life? You know what I mean? It was almost like, are you willing to join up and go to war? Join up, come join the great battle. And that's what that was, a rallying cry. Are you hard? I was like, come on, if you're hard enough to do this job. I mean, basically, wasn't that?
Come on and go, you think you're hard enough.
Yeah, well, that was halftime at Norwich on a Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, it felt like one of those like 1990s. When they used to do the football managers thing.
Yeah.
But you first for the cameras. Was it Barry Fry or something?
Yeah.
In the dressing room. And he's just swearing and cursing.
Do you think you're hard enough for the school? Do you think you're committed enough?
Yeah.
Do you think are you hardcore enough? It was like the American military, or like your country needs you. If you've got it, come and
got it.
Yeah. And you were saying you felt that
it's just interesting. I kind of went for a afternoon walk with the teacher who's retired now, and kind of just catching up with. And he read it completely differently. He read it as maybe it's a guy he's had enough of himself. The guy that's actually wrote the article.
There's a shortage of
teachers. A lot of anger kind of being put into that maybe he just was so sick of the whole situation of continually recruiting, maybe, or that he's almost had like he's had a moment and he's just kind of blasted it on. Not thinking there'd be the bit. Well, I don't know. Maybe he wanted to make a point. Maybe of this. This is so ridiculous.
Or maybe this is a way to manage the rest of his staff.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine if I'm one of the people in his staff room, because you should internally appoint sometimes, shouldn't you? What's that really saying? If I worked in that school, what would you saying is, sorry, none of you currently working here could actually do that.
Yeah.
To go outside and say that, would you not turn around to a couple of your staff members and say, look, this is our school. You want to be at the school. You want to be here. Yeah. You love this place. Look, step up. I want one of you to be a senior manager, and this is what I want from you.
Or he is internally recruiting, and he just wants to put a ridiculous advert out there. You just don't know. I mean, I'd love. I mean, he probably is sick of all the publicity that.
Yeah.
If you'd like to come on the show and talk about kind of,
I admire him for doing it.
Yeah,
I actually do.
Of the reasons why maybe that advert's kind of went.
But it is interesting how it got some people sort of like, this is what a modern job is. I'm not going to deny that some of what I've done in my last 19 years in the school I've worked in has gone above and beyond what you'd expect a normal teacher to do. Course, but what I will say is I have got that back in bucket loads, from the joy in the classroom to the school trips with the kids, to a longevity of a career that people don't always have these days, and staying in one place. And that's one of the reasons why I have, because it's a vocation, not a vacation. And that was always one of the mantras of the school culture of where I'm at, was also it's service above self. You put others' needs, but that's a breaking point now. And I've had a lot of my colleagues now are almost talking about work to rule, or silently quitting.
Yeah, silently quitting is kind of, that's just not.
And maybe that's a reaction to possibly this culture of silently quitting.
But I think it's a culture generally across. It's not. I don't think it's exclusive to teaching.
No.
I think that's an issue that we've got in this country just generally about management culture, in the UK, and it's interesting. The politicians. There was the guy at the union from the public service body was on, Laura Koonsberg, this morning, and she was talking about the amount of complaints that have gone in from the civil service about their
hostile environment.
Hostile environments. Now, I think there's a genuine. Dominic Raab was also on was on Koonsberg today, and I looking at it,
was he defending himself?
I don't think he's defending himself anymore, because I think he genuinely doesn't think he's done anything wrong. He looks like a man. He doesn't look bothered at all. He looks like a man who doesn't feel like he's done anything wrong. So maybe there's this misunderstanding of let's give him his dues in a minute. There's a misunderstanding of what he feels is demanding and what other people see as bullying. I mean, there are obviously clear cases of bullying in some cases that have been dealt with. I know John Burkow and a few others.
They
actually went through the review, didn't it? It did came out that he had.
He'd overstepped the mark.
But so it'd be interesting to see how that plays out, about this line between being demanding.
But isn't that interpretation? And that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, we are talking about
interpretation, because what somebody might turn around and say is hothousing, or for instance, again, you're down to, I play with the kids. I play with the kids a little bit more rough.
Yeah.
Because I'm, that's the way I was brought up.
Yeah.
I take the girls out to play football. They fall over. What am I going to do? Am I going to, get back up?
Yeah.
Now that could be seen as being a bit harsh parenting. That's not. That's what's natural to me.
Yeah.
But that's where you have the conversations, don't you, as partners, when you go, well, how are we going to raise our children? We want our children to be strong and resilient, but we want them also to be emotionally sort of well adjusted.
Yeah.
And it's the same with our children in school. We want the fine balance between having children who are resilient, but also children that can feel safe. And all the stuff that we're seeing here, all these news stories are showing certainly there's not the balance there at the moment. There's either one extreme to the other extreme. And I think, and that's the problem we're seeing with everything now. There's one way or the other way. There doesn't seem to be compromise. Take, for instance, a situation at home. It was locked into a zero-sum game. Now you've got one group saying, we want our version of Brexit. Another group saying they want their version of it. And I don't want to go down that route too much, because obviously that's, it's a bit of a sideline. But it illustrates the point that, in the 1990s, we had, you both don't like this deal, you do a deal. Now you have, well, we want our way, you want your way. It's almost like we're in a part of society now where everybody wants their way. And they're not willing to compromise, and their way is right. And everybody's opinionated about it. And this is the thing, everybody's very opinionated about everything. But I don't know if they actually do the thinking any longer. They sort of formulate the opinion. For me, the opinion is formulated first before the evidence is given.
Yeah.
And that's something I'm always trying to teach the children about. I do not want your opinion or conclusion until you have waded through these sources, until you've come up with the evidence. Give me your opinion at the end. And often now they don't. Now they have a formed opinion based upon a very small minutiae of details, which then obviously their hypothesis is not open to negotiation because I'm right, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And we've seen that with so many things over the last couple of years, haven't we? And I think this is what we're going to talk about today, is exactly the example. But looking at some of the news stories, let's have a look at some of these news stories, because I think that will also filter into this. Because you have, this week you've had striking teachers named by school heads. Now, I'm going to break ranks here. I think this is absolutely disgusting. I think it's absolutely ridiculous and disgusting. Unions and head teachers have criticised school leaders who have thrown colleagues under the bus by naming striking teachers in letters to parents, or employing agency staff to keep classes open on striking days. The NEU union condemned the naming and shaming of those taking action as appalling, and attempted to put pressures on teachers not to make them stand on pay. The NEU says the vast majority of school leaders, and I agree with this, have been supportive of striking staff. Absolutely. Head teachers, if you're listening, you are amazing. I think you're absolutely wonderful people. And I think the job that you do is so undervalued, and you have my support in absolutely the majority of things. But if there are head teachers out there that are naming and shaming their staff who are going on strike, then you are crossing way over a red line for me. Mary Bousted, the General Secretary, said, there are heads who have been swayed by heavy guidance from the Department of Education that must keep schools open at all costs, employing agency staff. Bousted said such pressure was intimidation and bullying, and added, strong from Mary Bousted. That's very strong from her normally. She's quite tapered. Publishing the names of striking teachers is I can't even say the word. Invidious.
Invidious, yeah.
Gosh, terrible. I shouldn't read something like that, but practice it beforehand. The head of a primary academy in North England, who was asked to remain anonymous, warned this might backfire with teachers unwilling to take a job at the school. And that's it. That breaks an unwritten contract. But I want to work for somebody who would be, willing to throw me under the bus?
Yeah.
I'm willing to what? No, I'm sorry. And if I was the union rep in that school, I tell you what, there would be a serious conversation to be had with my head teacher. And that would be, I would walk. I'm saying, no, I'd walk. And I would encourage as many members of staff.
But more importantly, it's just going to destroy. I mean, those staff.
What's the morale on that staff?
They can't. I mean, also the head is inviting a larger debate there with the parents. I mean, the parents are going to be calling in. Some parents will support, some parents won't.
You can imagine what social media will do to those teachers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You can imagine the social media pressure they're putting.
It just builds a whole storm around.
And you can imagine that the child turns around and says, "You're one of those teachers that's costing my education because you're on strike." That is so out of order. It's going to make me more upset talking about it. So I'm going to leave that there before I get extremely upset about that, because that's beyond appeal. But I taper it with the vast majority of head teachers out there are absolutely fantastic. And I can only speak on behalf of the ones that I know who have managed the situation in the school strikes completely amicably and completely well within the bounds of trying to protect their staff. So I praise the vast majority of head teachers out there who've got a difficult job trying to meet the needs of the learners, their staff, the community, and satisfy the Department of Education at the moment. It is a thankless, difficult job, and I thank them for that. But somebody going to that lengths to criticise their staff publicly like that, what do they say? What do we say?
Well, it's naming.
What do we say? What do we say? We say we criticise in private, we praise in public. Yeah. There's you practice what you preach. You criticise in private, you praise in public. Pupils' absence remain above COVID levels. So I saw a tweet the other day that had a real funny side to it, going like 95% attendance. Wouldn't that be a miracle? Remember those days of 95% attendance? What would it be?
Well, I mean, there's also been an interesting debate about this, about if it is 95%, and you've seen the one that talked about free school meals. The schools get the money for free school meals, so therefore they should be having extra money. If
there seems to be money going missing.
Well, I'm not saying there's money gone missing, but that money might be genuinely used in the school. But it's certainly, if you're a governor, I would have thought it's certainly maybe worth a question, isn't it? Of where's this money being used? I mean, it might be genuinely. The head might go, yeah, absolutely, it's being used for this resource, and and it's absolutely fine. So we're not kind of deliberately saying it's being used for misuse or whatever. But we, that money should be in the system somewhere. And in some schools, it can be up to about 10 grand.
It can be. I've seen that. Yeah. And when the thing is, I think the whole free school meal thing needs looked at, especially from during the COVID. I know that, for instance, in our area, there was offer of free school meals. It wasn't communicated to the head teachers of secondary schools, and those secondary schools just took it up.
Yeah.
So a company got a contract for free school meals, and they weren't taken up. Yeah. So what happened to that contract? And again, it's like everything that happened during that crisis. I think there's a lot of things need to be learned, especially about requisitions and public money. And certainly you've seen the free school meals plan by Sadiq Khan. And I won't go into it too much because we discussed that this morning on our weekly review. Mm-hmm. And our sort of consensus was it seems like a good idea on the surface, but actually if you look beneath the surface, it needs well researched, well thought out. Mm-hmm. It needs the deliberate policy. It needs to be, what do we do after the year's funding is up? And then, what about secondary school pupils? What about pupils who can afford, parents who can afford to pay free school meals? Why should they get a free school meal? And we sort of looked at both sides of that, of universality. Everybody gets a free school meal, so everybody then eats. So then you've got your Maslow hierarchy of needs to met. So I think that free school meals is going to be a long burning, and I think that's going to become a very, very big political issue come the next general election. I think that'll be something where one side might say, schools don't provide free school meals because that's not your job. Yeah. And there is a danger of mission creep because we are becoming like an emergency service. Social workers, psychologists, teachers, counsellors. Where is our job these days? Where do we end? Where does the school responsibility end? Which was the theme of Tom's show last week. So, free school meals, and Sadiq Khan's unveiled his plan for £130 million of the academic year of 2023, 2024. But it has its critics. My heart says it's a good idea. My head says it needs well thought out. Vapes are becoming the new alco pops. So you and I had a joke about this, saying that this generation's poison seems to be vapes, whereas our generation's poison was cheap cider and alco pops.
Well, it was just I mean, it's really interesting. I was talking to my daughter about this, and she was saying that everyone, literally as the school gates are opened, the whole school, the front then, it's like almost like a steam train, like a locomotive of vapes kind of going down the road. There was a debate that was meant to be had. I don't know if it ever was about, because I remember one of the companies decided that they were going to advertise or hand out not free vapes, but kind of heavily discounted vapes outside Pride Park. And there was criticism of them right at the start. This was years ago. This was 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
And the debate really hasn't been had really about schools and young people's health and how they're marketed more at children.
Oh, there is definite sort of the way the colours, the flavours.
Yeah.
There is a definite sort of.
It's all like cookies and cream and
apple and everything else. And I know there is a definite epidemic of vaping going on. And what I said it before in one of our previous shows, that it's not exactly the students you would expect either.
Yeah.
It's yes, we always had a culture of a certain percentage of kids would smoke. And there was always a correlation between the social pecking order of the kids that smoked and the kids who were a bit more naughty. I mean, there was an element of bad boy, bad girl syndrome
like
there,
Greece,
wasn't it?
There
was, wasn't it? There was an element of that, and I used to have friends in both camps. I used to be around at what we called Smoker's Corner, and I reflect on that. And how did the teachers not know that was Smoker's Corner? It was sponsored by Benson and Hedges, and you know what I mean. And literally, there was again that pipe of smoke, and there was always that battle between the teachers and the smokers, and they'd shift on somewhere else. And I remember when I started teaching, we used to have that battle, but that has now changed into vaping in the toilets. We had to change our toilets because we had students who were trying to stash vapes in toilets. They were actually breaking the toilets because they were climbing up. Yeah. They were climbing up and stashing their vapes in the toilets.
It's like a prison.
and then literally and again not the type of students you would have expected. And what's the definition of something that is addictive is when somebody can't do without it. And I think some of our children are becoming addicted to vaping. Now, is it better than smoking? Yeah. But as you rightly say, I don't think it's been fully investigated what the long-term impacts of vaping are. So everything else in excess, something that's used a lot is not good for you. And even if it's a lot better than smoking, if they're using it all the time, they wouldn't be smoking 60 Bensons a day, would they, at age 16? They wouldn't have the time.
Yeah.
But if they're constantly vaping, then I think this needs really to be looked into. And it's one of those, again, that I think will be a slow-burning issue that will start to reach critical mass. Of course, the strikes aren't called off this week. We had a little bit of mood music from the Department of Education saying, please call off the strikes, and we'll have a little chat with you. And that little chat wasn't really constructive at all. I think there was a little bit of blame gaming going on of like lastminute.com of let's call off your strikes and we'll start talking, rather than here's the deal, have it. There was an element of here's the deal, call off your strikes. No, call off the strikes and we'll start to talk over something you've had 6 months notice. So
where are you at? Do you think that there'll be a kind of the end negotiation will be somewhere around something with the work and conditions on, because there was some movement on that, with a small payment maybe, or some kind of payment that covers this year?
What was coming out was actually next year is going to be worse. So, I mean, I don't think the message has been fully understood. I don't think that the government is fully understanding what's happening in our schools. I don't think they fully appreciate it yet. And unless they get a grip of it, I can only see this becoming more apart, pulled apart.
Yeah, but if it was tomorrow, if they said, Brent, you can have that Wednesday, do your admin, you've got a whole day to your admin, plus you can have a payment now to fix the lack of pay for the inflationary increase, and then a levelled inflationary pay next year, would that be enough?
Bus drivers getting 18%.
I know, but that's... and
I'm not... No, hey, bus drivers are essential workers, and we needed them during COVID.
But as I said to you...
I'm 26% down, so any chance of a 27%?
But we've had this conversation before, haven't we, about... We went in, and this was a criticism. I had this criticism of the union, that we went in talking about the inflation.
Yeah.
So therefore, they've tied themselves into that argument with inflation. So therefore, it's going to be...
They've also tied themselves into the historical pay. This is why... this is why the only mistake I think my unions make, and I'm not trying to be critical of them, and it's just I don't understand why this happened. We should have been on strike 6 months ago.
Yes, absolutely.
Because then it looks to the general public that why were we late to the party? We're just piling on all these others. Our need is genuine. I think certain public sector workers, when you look at our pay, especially obviously, I think nurses, they're unbelievable. We saw it during COVID. But then again, let's not undersell the service that we give during
No,
COVID.
no, I understand that.
And for me, then we should have been. Now I understand why we're such a big body of people. To get us home, they had to do an indicative ballot, and they had to get the 50%. So it comes back to the government again of to try and get us over that 50% threshold. It took a long time to organise the union. But that is my only criticism, and I'm sure they would, if Daniel or Neve was going to talk about the prospective candidates who are going to be on our radio broadcast on March the 3rd with Tom HB, they would say obviously it took a long time to get us all organised, and it was a big ask, and we're one of the biggest unions in the country, and I get that completely. But for me, the government have had 6 months advance notice that we were going to go on strike on this.
But with respect, they don't need to do anything, do they? To a point, they don't. They could, because they think the argument is tied into inflation.
Well,
I think their debate is they're just going to let inflation.
I think the question is, do they want to? Because here's the thing: do they want to resolve these issues? I don't see that they want to resolve these issues because, cynically speaking, are they playing into the militant union bosses? Or are they going to divide and conquer? The teaching profession. Are they going to? I mean, when are they going to negotiate? Seriously, sit down and actually talk about these issues? Because I've seen nothing yet.
Well, there's been more in the last couple of weeks from this. Well, there has been.
There's been mid-mood music.
Well, there's certainly been some mentions about of
exactly.
But previously there was nothing.
There's no concrete plan. There's no concrete. This is no recognition of. You know what, teachers? Yes, since 2010, you've had a rough time of it, and thank you for all you've done. And thank you for all you continue to do. We recognise there's a recruitment retention problem. So to resolve this recruitment and retention problem, we want to keep experienced teachers like you, Brent. Thank you so much for giving 19 years of your life, blood, sweat and tears into the teaching profession, and altruistically given beyond and beyond. You do above and beyond, like many in the public sector do. Thank you very much for that. You haven't been financially rewarded for that. All I keep hearing is, you don't like the job, go get another one.
Well, that's what people are doing.
Well, that's what they're doing because that's what exactly the advice that's been given from government ministers. Hey, you don't like your job, go get we heard it this week. Don't like your job, go get another one and retrain. Stroke. I'm sorry, you can't get some salad vegetables. Eat a turnip. That was the advice So fine, let's take them at face value. Somebody else can come in and teach 4 subjects to 417 students with 19 years experience and still be 26% down. They wouldn't put up with this for a couple of weeks, never mind 19 years. So no. I'm not being militant or hardcore on this. I think enough is enough. We've drawn the line, and unless they're willing to actually step up and say, you know what, and recognise the problems and have a plan in place. I don't expect them to fully fund teachers' pay straight away, but to turn around and say, and not even recognise the problem in the first place. No.
Right, should we? Do you want to go to the main?
Do you
want to do Andrew Tate?
I want to do the Andrew Tate one because I think this is very relevant, and then we'll go to the news and we'll come back. And I think this comes back to we could discuss a bit of people's rioting or toilet change, which I think we'll bring into bring that into our main discussion, which will come after the news. So this is an interesting one because we have discussed on Teachers Talk Radio Andrew Tate, and we had this individual from Eton College. Now he was sacked, and he was sacked. His name's Will, and he was sacked because. Basically, he had done something along the lines of, and this is how it goes. The rise of Andrew Tate's influencer has vindicated the decision to show Eton College pupils a controversial video on masculinity, according to the master, who was fired for doing so. Will, who was taking he's taken the school to employment tribunal, believes that Andrew Tate had tapped into a malaise among young men caused by the teaching of boys in schools. In a properly functioning education system that's given them a really robust messaging about what it means to a man, they would have had the antibodies, he says, to fight off the sick messaging that Tate is giving them. He said to the Times, when teachers try and explain why Tate isn't doing something to look up to, teenage boys ask them, well, what colour is your Bugatti, sir? The premise needs to be attacked directly, which is that no money is the main index of masculinity, he added. So this individual was fired for showing this toxic video, his video that was considered to be toxic and was controversial on his YouTube channel. And he was sacked from Eton for it. And he's now hit back and said, well, I was correct. I was right. Look what Andrew Tate. This was justified and vindicated. So he's attacking the culture in schools. He's attacking that the way kids are taught in schools is not preparing them for, and not giving the boys the right message on how to combat Andrew Tate, which is an interesting thing and what we're going to talk about the cancel culture, because he would probably say that he's being cancelled. He has not been he's not been taken out of the teaching profession, so to speak. He had no case to answer for their own, and I think they teacher standards, etc. So it is interesting that's resurfaced now, and he was accused by feminist groups and LGBT groups of being completely bang out of order about the way this video came across as being, they saw it as homophobic, they saw it as quite sexist. He saw it as he was preparing these boys for being men of the future, and that it's better coming from him, he's probably suggesting, than coming from Andrew Tate. So there is the discussion with that of again, he's tried to do something. I'm not going to give my opinion about where I think he's wrong or right. Haven't seen the video, so I haven't seen the video, and I don't plan to see the video, to be perfectly honest with you. But this encapsulates that kind of discussion of one person on one side saying, here I am trying to teach these boys to fight this toxic masculinity, where somebody else turns around and accuses him of being the person with the toxic masculinity. So then that begs the question is, what masculinity do we want to teach children in school? Because there's a gap that this man has felt that he's trying to fill, the void. We're all trying to scramble to combat the message of Andrew Tate. But there isn't, and here's my issue is, where is the guidance? Where is that, where is the consistency? Should he have had to go off and do that? Where's the guidance for him? And we're still waiting for the guidance on things like LGBT. The government still haven't published us guidance. And that nicely leads into what we're going to talk about. It's like, what risks do you take as a teacher in the classroom with what you're teaching? If somebody can write and say, sir, you're homophobic. Sir, you're transphobic. Sir, you're anti-feminist. Sir, you're anti this. We're walking the tightrope, aren't we?
But they're going to be brought up by our pupils, and we're not going to have the confidence, are we, possibly, to deal with these questions?
No, go play it safe.
Yes, we end up playing safe, which in itself could be wrong or harmful for somebody who is vulnerable at that stage.
You run the risk of having a discussion with children, and I've had this discussion with children. I know of a student who, on their English oral, GCSE, identifies as a feminist, had a discussion about trans issues, and highly functioning individual that probably go to one of the top universities, and it was a difficult question to in the classroom, and I know it was spilled over into my classroom as a history teacher, and I had to deal with that and sort of like say, look, there's two sides to the argument, please don't fall out with each other, and it was like daggers were drawn. But should we allow that conversation in our classroom, or should we just say, I'm sorry, this is not for this discussion here? Same as the Andrew Tate.
Yeah, so we start shutting stuff down.
But because we're afraid.
Because we're afraid.
Because you don't want a parental complaint. You don't want a parental complaint. And also, here's the thing: kids hear something in school, they take it out of context. How many times has a teacher turned around and used the word appropriately, and then the children have gone off? I used to do this, and I don't do this any longer. I used to teach about William the Bastard was the leader of the Norman army. And I used to do this for year 7. And the kids were all like, I went, no, that was his name. He was William the Bastard, then he was William Duke of Normandy, and then he was William the Conqueror. And you think one of the reasons he wanted to be called William the Bastard. Because, why was he called that? Because his mother and father were technically not married. His father was,
literal sense.
His mother was a tanner's daughter, and his father was a lord, and he was born out of wedlock, and that is the technical term. And it was derogatorily used, and that brings me to the conversation I have with the children. At that time, that was used as a derogatory term. It's still used as a derogatory term now. So therefore, I don't walk around the classroom, look for somebody called William and go, William, you are. And I don't say it then. And they get that because I'm using the word in its correct context. I should not be not able to use the word, because what am I then doing? I'm insanitizing history and going. Because part of that is one of the reasons I believe that William the Conqueror became such a fierce soldier and a fierce conqueror, is he was trying to change his background, like the Jon Snow character out of Game of Thrones. He's trying to overwrite that. He's trying to legitimize himself. He's trying to become a powerful person. Now, I know I've got to teach Queen Elizabeth later on in GCSE. I have to get into the fact that Queen Elizabeth was born technically out of wedlock, and that the Catholic Church called her Elizabeth the Bastard, and she responded by calling herself Elizabeth the Virgin Queen. That I have to be able to teach this stuff. I have to be able to have that conversation. But lo and behold, every once in a while, what do I get? I get a phone call. Mr. Poland, did you swear in class? No, I didn't swear in class. I used the word bastard in the correct context. Simple as that. I'm not apologising for it. I'm sorry that you find that word offensive. It wasn't meant in an offensive way. It's not meant to be offensive. It is meant as an historical record that William the Conqueror was called William the Bastard because his parents were not legitimately married. And then you have this week where the SNP lady, who's standing for election, She unapologetically went, I'm a Christian,
Yeah.
and this is what I believe, and she came out with what she believed. And I, refreshingly honest for a politician, if you ask me. But it seems that she's committed electoral suicide. And some have gone, no, she's actually been honest, and she said who she is. And others said, well, no, you can't have this person lead a progressive party. Yeah. Boom, debate has opened up.
Well, she's actually had some more support from the Muslim community in Scotland because of talking about her religion. So I know that she has picked up the people who want somebody who is of piety,
a faith,
a faith, and be proud of that faith. Other faiths, actually, bizarrely, have said, actually, we support her ability to say that she is of faith, and she wants to. Is part of her being, and she wants people to know.
What is her choice? She doesn't. What's her choice? She turns around and somebody asks her the question and says, well, how do you feel about abortion? And she goes, I disagree with it. But your party's line is to support abortion. What's her other choice? Would you agree with abortion? Ask me the next question, please. Yeah. Well, she gets accused of doing the thing that politicians get accused of doing. Yeah. But at the same time, she's leading a party that is progressive. Yeah. But should it matter what her personal opinions are? It should matter what her job.
Well, there's another debate there, isn't it, about can religions be progressive? And they probably can be.
But we're going to discuss. We've had you've had a response this morning from
David Baddiel has posted something, an incredible piece, and we'll talk about it later on. We'll do the news, and then we'll come back and go deep into this notion of cancel culture, what's going on with our literature, and also kind of the words, as Brent just said, how
context.
Challenging, literally what we're using as our tool is our voice, and the words that we use are going to be interpreted, and we have to think sometimes very quickly about the words we're using. Sometimes we get them right, sometimes we don't get them wrong, and about kind of what that means to education generally.
It's a minefield. You are willing, if you are willing to call in, ring, send us a message, give us some feedback. We've got a couple of messages here. Actually, they're just the people coming in. But you're more than welcome to send us a message, discuss the debate. We're going to have this big debate in about 6 or 7 minutes after we come from the news. But please, by all means, more than happy to discuss any of these or give us some real life examples of what we consider to be cancel culture in the classroom. We are going to discuss the Roald Dahl situation, and actually Ian Fleming, which has come up this morning. Literally, as we were starting to look at the show, I was reading about Ian Fleming's Live and Let Die, especially, has been rewritten to take out some references to race, for instance. And again, that's now sort of started and sparked the debate and add fuel to the fire of what was the Roald Dahl, which I think is the wider issue of this idea of cancel culture and the idea of the culture wars, which I don't like, because I don't think there is culture wars. I just think there is culture and it evolves. And somebody putting a name to something like woke and culture wars is putting a name to what's been happening since mankind's been cave painting, basically. But going back to my Aboriginals, they have 40,000 years of their culture. And they're the single biggest, culture that's one culture from one to the start to the finish. I.e., their culture's still going. And when you go to their rock art in places like Uluru and Langi, for instance, and I visited those places, and they're quite sacred and quite solemn, you actually see the 40,000 years of layered rock art, which show. And guess what they do? Do they take a new wall? What do they do? On top of. Yeah. In other words, when you're studying something Aboriginal rock art, they have to scan. They've had the ultraviolet scan to see what's under, because and then the guy, it was absolutely brilliant when I did this 20 odd years ago. He says you can now start to date the arrival of the Westerners. The style changed. The stuff that people have in the shops now, that Aboriginal art they have hanging up, and they're quite well to do. You see, it's now quite fashionable in people's mantel places. That's not the traditional art form. That's been westernized as a kind of like same as your Indian curry you get in your curry house in England. That's been westernized and kind of changed slightly. The same goes for them, but that means that their culture has been continually evolving for the last 40,000 years. Yeah. And somebody turned around in the Aboriginal background 20, 30 years ago, like, oh no, we're not having this story because that's cancelled the previous. In other words, every generation puts its twist in interpretation. Yeah. So I don't like, and I'm never going to use those words ever again in broadcast of woke, wokerati, culture wars. I don't accept that they actually exist, because I think it's all part of society and culture, full stop.
Yeah.
And I think people are using this as a kind of like a lightning rod to weaponize it. But I think there is always that
It's
debate.
probably a distraction more than anything.
But it is. But I think there is a definite debate to be had,
Yeah.
and that debate, especially for us, is extremely relevant because we are interpreters of the culture.
Yeah.
Because we, as you say, we have generations that we have to teach. The question is, what do we pass down to them? How do we communicate to them in the culture and time that they're in, from the culture and time we've left, from with material from a culture and time before we've even got.
Right.
And that's very well. Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
So we are. Let me put that together again. We're trying to teach to a generation that's in the culture and time now.
Current.
We're from
current,
a previous.
Yeah, so they're current. We're previous.
We're previous,
Yeah.
but we're also using material from previous to even previous generations, which we ourselves have had to interpret and then pass on to them.
And we've been taught stuff in a certain way within a certain context as well.
By people who were a generation above us.
Right. Yeah, and they've interpreted it their way.
From their way, which it's an eternal thing, isn't it?
Well, let's go to the news then, and we'll see you back in about maybe 20 minutes.
No, 6 minutes.
Nah.
No. Where are we going?
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out. Visit johncatbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
STV reports that a council in Scotland could become the first to open schools for 4 days per week. According to the report, West Dunbartonshire Council is currently considering the proposals alongside a range of other measures as part of a bid to plug a £15 million funding gap. Currently, primary schools in the county are open to pupils from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. each day, with secondary schools running an asymmetric week with 7 periods on Mondays and Tuesdays and 6 periods daily Wednesday to Friday. The new proposals would see primaries open Monday to Thursday with hours of 8:30 a.m. to 3:45 p.m. and secondary schools running an 8-period day Monday to Thursday, beginning at 8:20 a.m. and ending at 4:10 p.m. The plans were shared with parents and are for the 2023 to 24 academic year. The other proposals being considered for education across the council are a reduction in the number of learning assistants, a review of grants for uniform, removal of breakfast clubs in primary schools and swimming lessons for pupils in primary 4. West Dunbartonshire Council says the plans would have no impact on teaching time or teacher numbers, but that savings would be made in costs for transport and energy usage. It does acknowledge that the proposals may impact upon childcare arrangements for parents, and that consideration must be given to support vulnerable children. Plans for fifth day provision for those children is being explored. The plans are likely to find favour with unions, as during June 2022's AGM for Education Institute Scotland, delegates backed a motion calling for a move to a 4-day week, stating that it could improve the standard of teacher well-being. There is some concern, however, on the possible impact of the sort of move on those with non-teaching roles in schools. The Council will consider proposals during a meeting on March the 1st, 2023, before any further steps to consultation can be taken. The Channel Island of Guernsey has released the finding of its latest Young People survey. The results seem to indicate that vaping in schools is on the rise and that there has been an increase in bullying reports amongst children in Year 8 and Year 10. In better news, 40% of pupils surveyed believe their school now takes bullying seriously, a significant increase in the 26% figure from 2019. There has also been a significant uplift in the numbers of young people who cycle or walk to school, from 26% in the 2016 survey to 40% in 2022. Year 6 pupils walk or cycle the most. In terms of health, 40% of those surveyed admitted to trying vaping, although cigarette usage was down at only 15%. More Year 10 girls vape than Year 10 boys. The survey is completed every 3 years. Finally, Sir David Attenborough has praised Sunderland University's decision to join BAFTA's Albert Education Partnership to teach students the importance of creating sustainable content. Students on Sunderland's MA Media Production programme will benefit from teaching on topics such as the science of climate change, the environmental impact of the film and TV industries, sustainable production practices, and creating content with strategic environmental purpose. Sir David said that saving the planet is now a communications challenge, whilst Gary Stubbs, leader of the MA programme at Sunderland, said the university's film and TV department is set to take green issues to task. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week I'm asking a question that you don't dare to ask. There are some things in life that you're desperate to know, but just can't find the right person to ask. And when you try to search for it, incognito, of course, the answer still eludes you. Whether you're returning from, are on, or have already completed your half-term break, you can count on me to address the tech issues that face us in our classroom. Today, I ask, what is that bloody big hole in my desk for? You know, the round one that's too big for a cup holder, and if I poke any wires through it, the second I unplug and change rooms, they tie themselves into an array of knots that a master sailor would be proud of. If you're driving or operating heavy machinery, pull over. I've found out what it's for, and found a use for it. It's called a desk grommet, and it is for wires. But it's for wires when you're not hot desking and you're staying at the same desk with the same equipment. Some clever companies have come up with some solutions that you may want to get your school to invest in. The most basic is a flexible rubber desk grommet. This simply shoves into the hole and has a star-shaped rubber grip. Pull wires through it and they won't slip back through. I found a pack of 3 for £7. Bargain. Invest in a bit more, you can get a kit to make it a USB charging station. Now that will be rather more useful for bouncing from lesson to lesson. The cheapest I could find was around £20. Using the search term desk grommet cable management, I found for £27 a grommet with a standard UK plug socket, 2 USB charging ports and an RJ45. For the non-geek, an RJ45 is the Ethernet cable socket you plug your computer into to get the internet using a wire. This goes to show there's a tech solution for everything. Do you have a tech question that you're afraid to ask? Why not send it to @TT Radio Official? I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
As an elephant eats. What are you at? Getting terribly fat. What do you think will come of that? I don't like the look of it.
I couldn't resist. I just couldn't resist doing that. So that's obviously the 1970s version of the Roald Dahl classic, the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And we were just saying, well, actually that's the 70s version. There was the Tim Burton version in the 2000s. With Deepak Roy was playing just one Oompa Loompa. He was then the same Oompa Loompa. Yeah. And then we've now got, I think, a new adaptation coming out with Timothée Chalamet, who's the latest Hollywood actor, to sort of put his spin on the original Gene Wilder. But it was interesting, obviously, the changes from generation to generation of which Charlie and the Chocolate Factory would you identify?
I mean, I always thought the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory had that kind of, the Gene Wilder had the kind of almost like the Monty Python-esque style to the kind of the acting style. But we're not here to do kind of film reviews. We're really thinking about the words that are used in these texts. And I do want to bring in the article that David Baddiel wrote today, particularly on the
anti-Semitism.
It's in the Jewish Chronicle app, and I've shared it up on Twitter for you. His core argument here now is wider than the actual words, and actually thinking about the author himself. And his kind of core point of the article is either cancel Dahl as an anti-Semite, or leave his books alone. There's kind of that's his argument. So rather than us getting kind of has he used facts rather than he should be moved to enormous, actually is there a bigger question around Roald Dahl himself as an individual? And I mean, David Baddiel is calling him in this article an anti-Semite because of the things that he said in the New Statesman in 1982, and you can read that in depth on that article.
And I suppose that in that context of that time in the 1980s, because Roald Dahl was I think in 1990s he passed away.
Yeah.
So he was well aware himself of his own cultural significance, which is unusual, because authors don't always sometimes have that. Like artists, they don't always see the impact they have. Roald Dahl would have seen the impact of all of his work all the way through.
Those books would have been turned into films. And those books would be...
Well, I think he inputted into the original movie, didn't he?
And they were widely known at that point that these were kind of staples for young children to start reading from, weren't they?
Yeah.
And he was still alive at that point, and certainly in a position where he could have, retracted those statements in the New Statesman. There's obviously, obviously this is common sense, so I haven't done too.
But for our generation, Roald Dahl was a much-loved literary author of children's books.
That's right, yeah.
And now he's become... I mean, it's the same with historical figures. It's that revisionist thing of Churchill was a much-loved war hero. Now you're questioning Churchill. Gandhi was a much-loved pacifist. Now we're questioning Gandhi. And that's what sort of gets people's backs up. Yeah. But I don't see a problem with looking into the depth of the person themselves. But here's my thing. It doesn't change the quality of his literature. It doesn't change the quality of his cultural output.
Yeah.
I don't see anti-Semitism in his work. I don't think Baddiel would probably... If Baddiel felt he was anti-Semitic, he'd be saying, look at Roald Dahl's work. It's got anti-Semitic tropes in it. It doesn't.
We don't believe so. I mean, like it'd be interesting if anyone wants to kind of help us with that. We're more than happy to help that. We're not obviously not saying. We're just saying that we don't believe that we've seen anything from. I mean, it's been a long time since I've read a Roald Dahl book. To be fair, to think of a nuance of the thing, but we had the conversation earlier about musicians and film actors.
One of my favourite songs from the 1980s is Dire Straits' Money for Nothing, and I have that album. It's my first album when I bought it as a kid, and one of my favourite songs is Money for Nothing. There's a lyric in that would not fly now.
Yeah.
One of my other favourite songs is and it's not a Christmas song. To the rest of the world, they see this as a Christmas song. To people of an Irish vintage, we see it as a normal song, and that's the Fairy Tale of New York. And of course, the Fairy Tale of New York was, lines were changed in that.
Yeah.
But then again, when that was written in 1986, that was perfectly acceptable. I'm not saying it is acceptable now, but times have changed.
Yeah.
And of course, there are those that are saying that you've got to change the lyrics of the song.
Here's a question: was it acceptable, or was it just not challenged back then? I mean, I still think, because I remember
it wasn't acceptable.
When I heard that word as a kid, you still think, whoa. I
had no idea what that word meant.
No, but it still sounded like a word that had some kind of punch to it, or some kind of...
I used to sing the lyrics to that as a kid. I used to air guitar out to sting. It was actually sting, I want my... And then you had the drums going, and then you had that electric guitar. And I used to sing that word for word, and I had no concept whatsoever that word had any negative connotations. Because the naivety, that's the thing about the naivety of children. And later on in life, when I realised what that word meant, then you're like, oh, okay, I'm not going to sing that now.
Yeah.
But that is not the thing about it. It's all about the degree of context.
Yeah. So if that word's now changed, we're not going to hear that word being used by our school children. So therefore, we aren't able to educate them around that word. Is that part of the problem?
Oh, well, that word can be used because it's also a word for a piece of burnt wood. So as much like my William the Bastard was the leader of the Norman army, the words still exist in the language. Some of our words that exist, but it's the context of the words being used. Like I say, I could walk up to somebody and say, William the Bastard was the leader of the Norman army. Elizabeth was called a bastard by the Catholic Church because her parents were unmarried. But I'm not walking up to somebody called Elizabeth and called William and saying that to their face. And again, it's about the communication of context and about when it was written and about having that rich conversation. But it's the risk that you now take. I mean, if I accidentally had YouTube playing and I had that song playing and a kid walks past, and I have sometimes got YouTube on in my classroom and I'm doing work, And I'm quite famous for just having YouTube on the background, and that's my classroom, and I've got music in the background, and that might be on my playlist. I've had to take that off my playlist.
Yeah.
Because I'm now worried that if somebody walks past my classroom and they hear me going, I want my MTV, and I'm thinking, okay, I can't sing that any longer.
Yeah.
But that's me being aware of the fact that I don't want to put myself at risk, that somebody might take that out of context.
Yeah.
And for me, it's still one of my favourite songs.
Yeah.
But I now know that the lyrics of that belong in at that time when, as you rightly say, it wasn't challenged. But it doesn't make me homophobic
No.
that I listen to that song, or I even know the words of that song, or still love that song. Because that song is still that song, and yet I can, the same as the Fairy Tale of New York. I'm not completely cancelling anything from Shane MacGowan because he's used a word in 1986 that's now considered to be morally wrong to use that word. You have to. It's the same as moderating our language in the classrooms. Words that we say in the classrooms now, we have to be careful about. And I've had that situation. I got called out the other day by some of my young people. Because they'd gone onto they'd followed me on my Twitter, yeah, and I'd actually posted up a defence of Sam Smith. And what it did was I'd posted up a defence of Sam Smith that I'd seen on Facebook, and I thought it was very apt. And it was a picture of David Bowie, it was a picture of Kiss, and it was a picture of some of the 80s rock's Queen, for instance. And I had a line like this in my day. And there was the images of those 70s and 80s rock stars who of my day, who looked exactly like Sam Smith did.
Yeah.
And I put the defence of Sam Smith by going, come on, people, we've always had artists out there doing their thing and rocking their thing and dressing up like crazy people. That's what they've always done. That's what artists do. They push the boundaries. They push the boundaries of society. Lady Gaga and her meat dress. Madonna has been doing that for generations, pushing the boundaries, testing the barriers. And kids themselves, we want them to do that. But what did I get from the kids when I turned around and says, Sam Smith, he? I forgot. And that was it. Straight away, they rounded on me when you've just misgendered them. And I went, okay, sorry, what did I say? You said Sam Smith, he. And I went, okay, is Sam Smith they? And I completely, and it was not on purpose. It doesn't make me homophobic. It just makes me a human being that completely forgot that Sam Smith is there. But what did the students do straight away? They were triggered into, they were in purist mode. And I actually called them out and said, you've looked at me purely using the wrong misgender, and the first thing you do, instead of looking at the context of me defending them, you've gone straight for an easy, quick, you've used that word. And I thought, that's exactly what's happening in society at the moment. People don't look at the rich context of things. They go, you've said that word, that must make you this. Yeah. And it's the same with race, it's the same with gender, it's the same with a lot of things.
Equals this.
You've used that word, therefore you are. And there's no kind of going into the context of it. And there has to be more to that. You have to have less fear about using stuff. And that's why I think there's the two sides of this. There's some people out there going, you're telling me I can't use these words any longer. Why not? Because that makes you this. And you think, but it doesn't. Yeah. It doesn't, does it?
Okay. What about this then, just from a linguistic point of view? Is enormous just a better word than fat to use if you are trying to explain something, or if you want your children to read something? Would you prefer them to read the word enormous with all that kind of just in terms of the extra phonics and spelling and the size of the word and the way it sounds, the way it kind of rolls off? Is that not a better word to use anyway?
Do I prefer potato or spud?
Well, yeah.
Enormous or fat? Potato to me.
Yeah.
I don't see. I struggle with that, to be honest with you, because again, you start changing the words. I think, we'll go to the Pullman.
Yeah.
I think we'll go to the Pullman in a second, because I think he summarises that nicely. Changing the words sometimes, and the Ian Fleming one today, I think is a different case in some sense. And this is where you open the nuance. This is what's got to be nuanced. Like the lyrics of those songs in the 1980s that aren't appropriate now. And you rightly point out, maybe they weren't appropriate back then.
Yeah,
and they weren't challenged.
They've
never been
appropriate. But they're just not been challenged.
But they weren't challenged, nor equally was there a kind of like a recognition that the damage they might do. I mean, you asked me the question, the worst racial insult I've ever had. Go on, ask me the question.
What's the worst racial insult you've ever had?
Somebody called me a stupid Irish and then used the word B. Now, why would I consider that to be of the gravest insult? Because the stereotype of Irish people is we're stupid. Paddy Englishman, Paddy Irishman, Paddy Scotsman walk into the bar. Who's the stupid one?
Yeah.
I'm the stupid one. Why? Because the Irish people are stupid. Why is that the case? Because we've had hundreds of years of hibernophobia. Hibernophobia has basically vilified my people as drunks. St. Patrick's Day, I don't drink.
Yeah.
I'm a very light drinker. And what will I get? Well, Mr. Poland, what are you doing here in St. Patrick's? I've had parents even in St. Patrick's Day. Your parents walk up to me and go, oh, Mr. Poland, it's good to see you here. You know what I mean? It's good to see you here on St. Patrick's Day. You're going to be drunk later. And I'm like, what? What do you mean I'm going to be drunk later? What do you assume?
Yeah. You can own it now, couldn't you, with Guinness Zero?
St. Patrick's Day wasn't celebrated in Ireland until 1980s, 1990s because the Catholic Church shut it down. We weren't allowed, we had to go to church. It was a holy day of obligation. That's why they had all those parties in New York. It was all the Irish that got out of Ireland in New York. And Liverpool and Nottingham and all those places have big, and it's all the second and third generation Irish people dying the river green and going mental with the green and the colour of Ireland isn't even green, it's blue and gold. And that's what you get from people, is the stereotypical stuff. And that's where the tropes come from, and that's where you don't. You have that with Dickens. Dickens has been accused of this now with the racial trope of Fagin. Yeah. For instance, is Fagin a racial trope of anti-Semitism? So now we say, we can't talk about, for instance, the likes of it's Oliver Twist, because Fagin is a character in that. Now, was Dickens basing his character on an anti-Semitic version? Harry Potter, she got that recently as well with the goblins, where the goblins seen as. And it's only when you point it out, the same as when somebody points out about the lyrics of a song that I loved in the 80s, when somebody points out and says, oh gosh, should you have used the facial features of the goblins in Harry Potter matched with the fact that they're bankers? Does that play to some unconscious bias of the stereotypical anti-Semitic trope? And then when you see it, then you make the connection, then you go,
that makes sense.
Oh, ow.
It does.
Does it? But did she set out to do that, or is that our interpretation of it?
But I guess this is very difficult, and obviously Prince Harry made an absolute kind of ham-fisted way of having this argument, didn't he, about unconscious bias?
Oh, yeah.
But I think he's right in that sense, that we all carry this unconscious bias with us, and and as we've said with that hierarchy of, we learn from somebody to pass on to somebody, and we're trying to then navigate the new audience.
But you turn around and you said to me earlier on in conversation, I didn't correct you, and I could correct you, and you turn around and you go, what are you going to do for St. Paddy's Day?
It's true, yeah.
And I always correct people and go, St. Patrick's Day, we don't call it St. Paddy's Day, because that was the derogatory term for Irish people was Paddy, or derogatory term for Irish people was Mick.
Yeah.
Now, you know where Mick comes from, because the word Michael, but not just that. That's a derogatory term for Spanish people in an Irish version.
Yeah.
That's where that comes from. But when you know that, then you go, but if one of my friends turns around and says, oh, you Paddies are like this, Paddy, I wouldn't have a problem with that, because it would be meant in the context of, you Irish people. Yeah. But should I go around and say every person now, I should say, you're no longer my friend any longer, because I'm sorry, I don't like the way you say St. Paddy's Day. Yeah. But then again, is it up to us to challenge and say, me to have that conversation and say, look,
I'm learning now from what you're telling me,
But every culture has this idea of what is appropriate, what's inappropriate. You take somebody who somebody was trying to say, we can't turn around in the classroom and say to a child, that child over there is fat.
Yeah.
So then should we have a book that we're teaching children has the word fat in it? When we know that turning around and saying to some children, oh, by the way, you're fat is body shaming. So I can see that argument. I can definitely see that argument. But then faffing around, as Badil says, faffing around and changing the word fat to enormous. It's moving deck chairs on the Titanic, isn't it?
On the bigger picture, like he says, so it's a really, really interesting debate. Have you had any kind of...
Yeah, Paul, our good friend from Merseyside, has, he said, we've been cancelling as long as I can remember, Conkers. Oh, yeah. That's the health and safety police on that one. Yes, that's true. We aren't allowed to use Conkers unless you have glasses. Come on. Yeah. And more regularly reported. So I think I agree with Paul with this. It's been more regularly reported and allows people to jump on the media bandwagon, unfortunately. And this is true. This is red meat to the thing. This sells papers, doesn't it?
My feeling on Conkers is just a rubbish game.
That's because you probably weren't very good at it.
I remember my granddad doing all the kind of soaking in vinegar, and he really wanted us to have a kind of nuclear concrete Concord steak.
So you want to cheat?
Completely smash it. It's basically cheating. Yeah. I was never really interested in conkers because I just thought it was kind of just a rubbish game anyway in the first place. So.
I like that Paul says that the enormous crocodile wasn't fat, so that doesn't make sense.
Yes. So in that sense, it doesn't. Yeah, good point.
So let's go to Pullman. Philip Pullman, who's a top author himself in his own time, and again one of those authors that is well aware of his cultural significance in his own time. The Golden Compass, I think, and again quite controversially, some of the adaptations of that, he's not happy with what some of the TV adaptations were of his work. I think the movie that was made in the 2000s, he wasn't exactly very happy with. So again, it's interesting to see an author still trying to control. I think Stephen King does that, still trying to control their work in their own time.
Yeah.
And then obviously making sure that they get the cultural significance. Movie directors do the same, don't they? They always. But that's the thing we were saying about the likes of movie directors always have like the director's cut.
Yeah.
Sometimes the studio edits out. Sometimes the publisher has a huge influence, and there is always that conflict between what a publisher says, the editor does, and what the author has written. So a lot of our actual books are already Anne Frank. The Diary of Anne Frank is not Anne Frank. It's her father that edited that. He took out all references to his flatulence, by the way. Of course he would. But there's us going like, oh, that's the Diary of Anne Frank. Yes, it is. It's already been censored by Dad.
Okay.
Dad has already censored that. So that's originally her body of work. Not completely, because Dad's gone through that with a fine-tooth comb. He's taken out references to sexuality. So we go, that's a diary of a typical teenage girl. No, it's not. It's a diary of a typical teenage girl that father's edited and then published.
Yeah.
So then we go, imagine we come along now and change some of the Diary of Anne Frank. So we go, oh no, you're changing that original body of work. No, Shakespeare in School. Shakespeare in School is not the Shakespeare of what Shakespeare wrote. It's adaptations of adaptations or versions. But the Bible, what's the most adopted book in the world?
Yeah, the Bible.
The Bible.
Yeah.
And what did happen is the printing press for me, along with the internet, are two of the most critical things that have changed human culture. Because before the printing press, you pretty much were told what the priest stood up there and says, here's the Bible according to us. You're not thinking about it. You're not writing. What did that do? Publishing the printing press turned science, culture, art, music, the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation. And I think that's where we're at the moment. We're in some sort of, because of the internet, because of opinions, because of the over information and the media and everything else, we are now questioning everything.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is we're questioning everything so much now, we're losing, I think, the context. And that's causing conflict. And that's literally what causing all those wars in the 16th century, which caused all those religious wars of, which I think Red Dwarf does a really good version of. When it has like the cat, the Red Dwarf, the original series. So the cat finds out that Lister is actually their god.
Oh yes,
That the cat they had, and what they find out was that Lister was he wanted to go to Hawaii, and he would have like purple hats or something, and the cat was like there was a religious war over what colour the hats were, and he goes, that was the colour, they're both wrong, and they wiped their whole civilization out because they dogmatically could not agree on which colour the hats would be. And that's, again, there's so many examples of people interpreting stuff and saying, this is ours, this is it now, don't change it. And then someone comes along and reinterprets it, and they say, this is my interpretation. And then there is that conflict of, I'm right and you're wrong.
Does every generation want its own interpretation?
I think every generation needs its own interpretation. I think every generation needs to have its stamp on the world.
But is that part of progressive life that it is going to be re-looked at and reanalyzed, and that is the purpose of the next generation, is to then look at what we're doing and kind of process that through their lens.
Take the original Bram Stoker, Dracula, written. Small, tiny book.
Yeah.
Now what's that spawned? Sparkly vampires up in northwestern America who now sparkle up, and a whole genre of that. And vampires, werewolves. And from that original body has now spawned almost a whole industry of stuff and a whole genre of stuff. Edgar Allan Poe stuff. So the original authors sometimes, they spawn and they spawn and they spawn, and other people come along and they take their ideas. And I often say this, you take, for instance, Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is a knockoff of so many other things, which was a knockoff, which was a knockoff, which was a knockoff. And again, it's based on a lot of stuff in history, and all they do is they take the stuff of the past and then they update it. Star Wars, I love Star Wars. What's Star Wars but World War II in space? You know, and then somebody comes along and criticizes Steven Spielberg. I remember this about 25 years ago. People go, well, this debate is new. It's not new. I remember Spielberg was getting rounded on because Jar Jar Binks was considered too Jamaican. Or Watto, the junk dealer, was, again, a racial stereotype of a Jewish guy. Lord of the Rings is getting it at the moment because the little people are a bit too Irish. And you get that, don't you? Or the orcs. Why the orcs in Lord of the Rings got Cockney accents? You know what I mean?
Do you think we're giving these books too much? There's too much on them to give a social commentary when actually they are just what they are, just a bit of entertainment, rather than something that does need this level of interpretation, analysis, and that type of thing. For example, the English literature courses, do they kind of overdo it with trying to pull all these things apart when probably they were just meant as, at the time, like a 3-minute pop song?
Well, yeah, the original The Hobbit was written as a story for his niece and nephews. The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe was written as a short story. And Harry Potter, what was she doing? She was scribbling down her pens for telling stories for her children. And then it evolves into this great cultural thing that people then go...
That's the thing, though. We're putting onto the book. The whole of society is putting onto the book.
Imprinting, isn't it?
Imprinting an opinion, a bias, a paradigm, whatever, onto something that was never meant for that purpose. It was meant for a piece of entertainment.
But then people can then say, this is my beloved Ronald Dahl. How dare you touch my beloved Ronald Dahl?
Like anything, like a pop song or a chocolate bar or whatever, they are a commercially entertaining thing, aren't they? That people can decide whether, there's nothing wrong with somebody saying, well, okay, I've got this, I've read Roald Dahl, I don't like the way he writes about this fat person, so therefore I am not going to read it. And that's fine.
You have a choice. You have a choice.
You have a choice. And then people not necessarily, people who are not so kind of overly concerned about it can just carry on reading it if they want to.
But our problem is, as educators, is that we have an element of choice. And in doing so, when you choose a body of literature, if you're an English department, you've had that choice of what do you do with Mice and Men? What do you do with some of those books that I've got? And I've taught Mice and Men. I've taught English with Mice and Men. And what do you do when it gets to that part, when the N word is there? And of course, what some schools have done is they've dropped it completely. Because they don't want the controversy. They don't want the issue. They've gone, you know what? But equally, I have to credit my head of English. We've updated, and year 9, we now have Cane Warriors. And Cane Warriors, a bit like 12 Years a Slave. It's, again, you're looking at some of these difficult things. But this is what the skilled teacher is able to do. They're able to, skilled English teachers, skilled historians are very good at putting things into context and should be fearless in doing so. But I do think a lot of schools are playing it safe on the curriculum. We'll have a play of Pullman, because I think Pullman is very, very relevant to what we're saying, and I think he succinctly puts it a little bit better than I might.
Well, when you're editing a book, there are all sorts of reasons for which you might ask the author to make a change or two. It might be someone who's addicted to the word grin, for example, so everybody grins all the time. You ask them to change that. Or it might be an unfortunate reference to something that he hasn't or she hasn't noticed, so you can ask them to change that. There's nothing odd about making that sort of change. There are millions, probably, of his books in second-hand editions in school libraries, in classrooms, in Oxfam shops and the like. What are you going to do about them? All those words are still there. Are you going to round up all the books and cross them out with a big black pen? The point is, these words, these phrases and language uses do change over time. For a young author now coming in who hasn't got the clout and the commercial power of someone like Roald Dahl, it's quite hard to resist the nudging towards saying this or not saying that.
So that's Phil Pullman. And his take is that it happens all the time. Editing happens all the time, and books get edited, and the body's already out there. That ship has sailed. It's closing the stable door when the horse is bolted. You can't undo the literature that's out there. I mean, are you going to go around and burn books in piles? I mean, that's kind of people who are against this obviously quote the Nazis, they quote Stalin, they quote purges, they quote 1984, they quote censorship. As an affront to freedom of speech, and I can appreciate that argument. I get that, because once that body of literature is out there, what are you to do? Hunt down every single book and say any Roald Dahl book out there that says the word fat in it is now to be deemed, banned. That's quite scary if somebody was doing that. But if you turn around and you update the book and say, look, here is, much like I was saying with here's Blade Runner, the director's cut. Here's Blade Runner, the original release from the cinema, from the cinema release. You have the choice then to say, actually, I want to watch the director's cut because I've got the ending I like. Where, I want to read the original Roald Dahl, I want to read the updated. And I suppose then as a school, it needs that thought of, the conversation of, right, we're going to read the original Roald Dahl here. Some of you might be offended by some of the words, but actually these words aren't meant to offend. It was written at that time. Here's the deeper conversation.
Yeah. And then there's a commercial aspect to this as well, isn't it? Not only kind of the editors, would it be Penguin? I think Penguin is kind of the group that's republishing the. Might have got that wrong.
The Penguin was yeah.
So there's a commercial aspect of just obviously this has created a bit of a storm, so they can obviously market that. So there's
James O'Brien had a really good take on that.
Yeah.
He was saying, I'm not being cynical about it. He had a big debate about this the other day, and he was like, well, you can imagine now that there's going to be sales of the original flying out the door.
Yeah, both, yeah. And also, obviously you've got to remember the Roald Dahl estate has actually sold the rights to Netflix for 50 to 500 million pound in 2021. So there's a commercial aspect to them of protecting their investment and not having any kind of controversy or concerns or anything. But I guess link back to David Dill's point, I think.
Well, some of his family are still there, aren't they? I think. Well, his granddaughter was an actress, wasn't she? And Sophie Dahl, wasn't it? So, but then again, that's the same as turning around and saying that some of the things that my father said, and I had to correct him and go, "Dad, you belong with somebody in the 70s. You are what you are from the time that you are, and to condemn people for what they used to be is a dangerous road to go down." Because as Paul again chipped in very well, he said, if we eradicate all evidence of history or language, good or bad, then how can we see how we've evolved? So that's again, I fully appreciate that as an historian, because when I look at sources, one of my jobs is to put the source into context at that time. And that's one of our key phrases, at that time, what was appropriate. If we make the decisions without knowing the context, how do we know if it's the right decision? Exactly. So that's one of the deeper things that we have to be able to do, is always put things into context. You can still use what Roald Dahl said, the same way you can use Of Mice and Men, and same way you can do To Kill a Mockingbird was always the controversial one as well. And again, that was turned into, some of the best ones are turned into other culture. And I think that's the thing with these books, is they start to spawn other cultural phenomena. Music, they inspire art, they inspire artists. And whether we like it or not, where we feel about Roald Dahl, I might say it's not somebody we would advocate because of his anti-Semitic views. You have to look at the body of literature he created and say, it's really good work, isn't it? Because you can come in at it from all his different cultural output. It is as good as it is because so many people have read it. How did it get to be good in the first place? It got to be good in the first place because the stories were good stories. I haven't read Roald Dahl to my children. If I had to read to my children now, I'm reading The Smoos and the Smeds. I'm going down Julia. Oh, what's her name? Donaldson's work, and I love all of that. Yeah. And in fact, it's now The Smoos and the Smeds. But I look at all of the stuff that she's doing, from the Superworm to the Stickman, and all those are all brilliant. But actually, look at the morals of Roald Dahl. You take, your what do you call it, Willy Wonka. And you ask me that question, what can you gain from Willy Wonka? Well, you gain what? Honesty. You gain, the morals in there about anti-greed, about kindness, compassion. It's still relevant, isn't it? Yeah. Culturally speaking, what he's saying about a young boy who's modest and is loving and affectionate, who loves his family, grows up in poverty. That's social mobility, if you ask me. You know what I mean? The actual tenements of what he was saying, same as the likes of Dickens. Some of the greatest pieces of work still remain relevant because they're grounded, I think, in humanity in that sense. And it's unfortunate that the author had certain views, but their body of work and the author should be separated sometimes, I think. And I agree with Badil. Obviously, we shouldn't. Anti-Semitism is something that needs to be challenged. But then we put that into context and say we shouldn't cancel the author. So those people out there are saying about, I don't read Harry Potter now because of what she said. You think, I want to separate the person I can condemn for what they've said, their body of work, well, that's something different, isn't it? That the actual work that they've done doesn't mean I'm endorsing them personally. It means that I'm looking at the work that they've produced. And if you started going around and saying, I'm going to not read anything, you could look into every author or every human being and find somewhere in their life they've committed some sort of sin. And before you know it, what would we be left with? You know, we'd have that's it. I'm not listening to Dire Straits any longer because they've got a word in there I don't like. That's two of my favourite artists of all time. I'm not going to, I think, you see what I mean? You've got to be very careful about what you cancel, because I think it's cutting your nose to spite your face. Because if you would, what a criteria, as Badil says, what criteria would you apply and say, we can't use this now? Am I not to watch James Bond movies? So are those old movies? I love those old movies. But you watch them now, and you have like the man forcing himself upon the woman, like Gone with the Wind. Greatest movie of all time, apparently. It has the most watched people of all time. Better than more than Avatar. And yet there's scenes in that where the man forces himself on the woman. The Me Too movement would be going, oh my gosh, you can't show that now. But you got to put that in the context. It's a 1939 movie. And in those movies, the man is, kisses the girl, and the girl goes, no, slaps him across the face, and then he goes, come here. And it's like Mad Men. Mad Men does that. It's grounded in the time, and therefore it belongs in that time, and you can still watch it. And it doesn't mean you, watching it or reading it doesn't mean you endorse the people of that time.
Unless you're watching it through nostalgia of a time that you think was right, I guess. That's the only counter argument to that, is that you're using it as a way to confirm your old biases.
Oh yeah, that does.
Anyway,
does that reinforces it when people do wax lyrical and go, oh, the good old days when that was. That's true. That's a really good point. Yeah. Are there some people out there going, can we go back to that?
Yeah, I think so. Nostalgia is particularly prevalent at the minute in society.
Rose-tinted glasses.
Rose-tinted glasses.
Yeah.
But anyway, we've run to the end of the time.
Oh no, we've got one more thing I want to do, and then we'll have a little thing with sponsors. But I do want to play this as well because I think this is fun.
That's what's bothering me. I want to be a man cub, and stroll right into town, and be just like the other men. I'm tired of walking around. Oh, ooby-doo, I want to be like you. I want to walk like you, talk like you, too. Don't try to kid me, man cub. I'll make a deal with you. Give me the power of man's red flower so I can be like you. Oh, ooby-doo, I want to be like you, someone like you. Now, you might think it's ridiculous that me, a gigantopithecus.
So there you had two versions of King Louis from Disney, actually, ironically, from the 60s and from 2017. And why I wanted to play that is that King Louis does not actually appear in the original Jungle Book itself. And I wouldn't have known that because if you read the Jungle Book, I mean, my access to the Jungle Book was through the Disney cartoon. And then I read the book. And that backs up my point about the fact that it's out there now. You can't go back. What's interesting about the King Louis character is that many now turn around and say, oh, it's a stereotype, and want to cancel the original 60s thing. Disney was aware of how it looked, and they were very careful about who they cast as King Louis. They had originally King Louis Armstrong, who was the King of Jazz back then. You can imagine Louis Armstrong's voice with Louis then, the orangutan. But they were well conscious that what the stereotype that would play at the time, and they cast an Italian-American who ended up being one of his greatest roles, who loved the role to the end. So it's an Italian-American playing. And in the updated version, that's Christopher Walken. And what they did was they realised that they were slightly inaccurate because it was the orangutans don't live in India. So they updated it with a prehistoric, I think what the name mentioned in that. So it shows that the majority of people out there would probably have King Louis in the Jungle Book and forget that he's actually not in the Jungle Book, and would go, well, let's not change the Jungle Book. Let's leave the Jungle Book as it is. Well, actually, they did, and the majority of people out there would have one of their favourite characters in the Jungle Book actually doesn't appear in the Jungle Book. But they wanted to keep the character, much beloved character, which is now part of the Jungle Book story. That when they produced movies about the Jungle Book, literally there it is. There's the King Louis character. They even kept the original, sort of little bit of the original soundtrack, because even my children will be singing, they know that song. Or they know, look for the bare necessities. And I think when we just completely destroy some of these I think, cultural icons without putting them into context, I think we lose a little bit. I think we lose a little bit of ourselves. So They are out there, and much like I agree with Bill Pullman, you can't just simply just airbrush stuff out. And I mean, part of me just doesn't feel right about that. As an historian, it doesn't feel right about that. But we do have to update, and we do have to make sure that we're in the context of our time. But as educators, we have to be careful, of course, that we are making sure we have our language correctly, because you run the risk, don't you? That's the unfortunate thing. You run the risk now of being cancelled yourself, as we've seen some happening. And that means you've got to be mindful of what you're doing, what you're teaching, what you're saying, because we are living in that world now where things get amplified. As Paul said earlier on, you everything you say now can be amplified, taken out of context and changed and spit back out. So it's a horrible, difficult one, because as a teacher you want to push the boundaries, but as a person you have to play it safe. And there's that bit of a dichotomy of cognitive dissonance of trying to be like and I think that's the same for pop artists. I think that's the same for anybody in the creative industries out there. They're trying to push boundaries, but mindful that I don't think it matters. What I'm saying is, I don't think what you do these days now, I think you're going to get criticized either way. I think if you produce a movie or a book or anything, there's always going to be somebody now going, I don't like that, reading a lot into it and opening interpretations. And as long as I think you're honest about why you're doing it and having the conversation, I think that's the most important thing, and to have that. So that's been our show today. Hopefully we're not going to get cancelled after that, and we've not offended anybody. I apologise in advance if we have. That's not our intention. Our intention is to create this discussion about this. And you'll obviously see in the news today, James Bond is the latest, which is interesting because they've just basically changed. And if I just read you, the last part of what I want to say is, they read you what they've done with James Bond. Again, there'll be a lot of furore about, oh my, well, you shouldn't have changed James Bond. They've literally just changed some of the words slightly, and it hasn't changed the context. They've actually said that they're trying to keep it in exactly their context by changing some of the offensive words. So they've taken the N word out and replaced it with a black person. Now, I don't see a problem with that, because even in the article, we'll put it this way, the newspaper article that said they're doing this actually doesn't mention the N word by name. It just says N word. So by definition itself, they're afraid themselves to publish because they know that is not a word that we would want our children to use. So again, I don't see a problem with changing that aspect of it. But I suppose what some would argue then is you open Pandora's box is where do you stop with that? So there has to be, again, that discussion in context of what is appropriate, and individuals not blowing this out of proportion and going, oh my, they're changing James Bond, Roald Dahl, what's next? No, this is a natural thing that happens over time. We've always done this, not to be triggered or creating a big hoo-ha about it. So remember, this show was sponsored by John Catt Education, and we've got some fantastic titles on John Catt Education at the moment. We looked at Michael Zergstra. I think so. I'm really gonna
please correct us.
Wrong. And he's got it's a sage on the stage, common sense reflections on teaching and learning, and I like that because I'm a bit of a sage on the stage. I'm sorry. Keep it to time.
You said straight away. I'm going to like that.
Straight away. And again, I have the background of that, of what we call it. Hattie says that nothing wrong with the stage as long as you regulate it and as long as you don't overdo it. And I want to have a look at that because it covers everything from school discipline to knowledge of no zero policies. We also have the Learning Rainforest. That's by Tom Sheringham, and that's bringing different constitutes great teaching in his own experience as a classroom teacher. And I like the look of that as well. So that's John Catt Education, who are our partners, and they publish books, directories, educational guides, and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools. So that's a little bit of your CPD if you want to have a look at that. Don't forget, you could join us and become one of our hosts. Come join the collective hive mind. It is Teacher Talk Radio.
If we get cancelled, then this show is available.
Yes, we could get cancelled, and you could be getting a slot. So I'm waiting for the complaints to roll in. Good luck with that. Good luck with shutting me up, because many have tried and failed. As my mother said, you started talking at 9 months and haven't shut up since. And my response is always, you shouldn't have taught me how to speak.
If Brent gets cancelled, he's going to move over to Great Britain.
However, there was one last thing. There's always one last thing with me. This is what I want to leave you guys with this week. And this is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story. And what I love about this is this just shows you exactly what the power of an individual is. An autistic sociologist who could not read or write until he was 18 has become Cambridge University's youngest black professor. Jason Arday, 37, had a global development delay of autism spectrum disorder, diagnosed at the age of 3. He did not learn to speak until he was 11. Therapists and careers advisors had predicted he would spend his adult life in assisted living and needed lifelong support. Wow. He is now Professor of Sociology Education at the University of Glasgow in 2021, making him the youngest professors in the UK at the time. He starts next month as Professor of Education, joining only 5 other black professors at the university. I think that is an amazing story of exactly the human spirit, of overcoming adversity, and exactly what I would want any of the children that I teach, how they strive, how they achieve, and how we can help them along the way. But it just shows, doesn't it, that the power of the human mind to be able to overcome. So I just when I saw it, I thought I want to end this, which was a bit of a controversial show and obviously a difficult show to navigate, and I think we've done it reasonably well. Hopefully we have done it reasonably tastefully and well, and not insulted or upset anybody. And please, by all means, please complain to the sky at anything we've said. But this is going to be a long-running situation. I think this is not going to go away. I think this culture wars and woke stuff and everything else is definitely here to stay. So we probably will have this conversation on numerous occasions. Thanks for Paul for his contributions, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in during the show.
Cool. Have a great day.
Have a great day.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.